Hey there, folks. Welcome to another edition of Time About the Movies. Today we're looking at the weekend of July 14th, 1989. We've got 3 movies to look at, 2 new movies and a classic movie. Let's get right on into it. Let's jump ahead to the first movie, and that is Timothy Dalton in his second and unfortunately last movie as James Bond, which is License to Kill. So as I said, License to Kill was the second and last film starring Timothy Dalton as James Bond. And honestly, I thought Timothy Dalton was actually a pretty good James Bond. I like where they were going with these movies. I like that they were taking more of a darker approach to these movies, especially with this one in particular. I actually think a lot of Casino Royale took a lot from this movie. In fact, I think a lot of the Daniel Craig movies eventually became took a lot from what the Timothy Dalton movies were trying to do. But unfortunately, like I said, this movie didn't do so well at the box office. When you're in a very crowded summer where you still have Indiana Jones playing, you still have Ghostbusters 2, you still have Batman, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, Lethal Weapon 2, these big hits, something unfortunately is going to have to give. And unfortunately, James Bond was one of the movies that had to give, so it quickly went away. I actually really like these movies. Like I said, I like the Timothy Dalton movies. I like that they did go for a much darker approach than the movies that had come before that. Like, the Roger Moore movies just got sillier and sillier with every passing film. I like that they took this new approach. I just wish that they would have made that third film to make me... Maybe if they made that third film, they would have had a reason to keep this series with Dalton afloat. But at the same time, I'm glad they took the... I'm kind of glad that it unfortunately did not succeed at the box office, because it eventually led to the Pierce Brosnan movies, which we'll get to those in 6 years when we get to that movie. But yeah, this movie, it also had a hard time selling itself. Like, you saw the trailer. That's a typical James Bond trailer. You've got the James Bond music, you got the clips of everything but then you have this other trailer that has a much more darker approach to it, and doesn't feel like a James Bond movie, which is both kind of a good thing and a bad thing. I think people wanted to see more of a James Bond movie. I think they liked what they saw with The Living Daylights. They thought that would continue with this, but like I said, stiff competition from most of the summer blockbusters kind of unfortunately caused this movie not to do well. Even though they were going to make a third movie in '90, and they had some other directors involved, like John Landis was in talks at one point. So was Ted Kotcheff. I can't remember some of the other names off the top of my head, but they were going to make a third James Bond movie with Timothy Dalton, but unfortunately that never went anywhere because MGM kept putting it in development hell. Production kept getting pushed back, and so they just left it go for a while, and then they eventually decided to redo it again, this time with Pierce Brosnan. But like I said, we'll get to those ones when we get to those ones. But yeah, I do like this movie a lot. I do like this movie. I like The Living Daylights a lot. I like this one very much. I think it definitely deserves a lot more credit than I think it has gotten. Like I said, I think a lot of what Daniel Craig's Bond movies eventually would become took a lot of inspiration from these movies. They did a lot better, but I think this movie was putting itself in the right direction. I'd say definitely give these movies another chance. Like the Timothy Dalton movies, like I said, Living Daylights, License to Kill, I think if you give these movies another chance, I think you will definitely find that there was more to these movies than meets the eye. So that's my thoughts on License to Kill. Let's go ahead and move on to the next movie, which is another Disney re-release, and that is the re-release of Peter Pan. Yeah, Peter Pan's one of those Disney animated movies that I didn't see when I was a kid a lot. I did remember a lot of the scenes from when I used to watch the sing-along songs videos and used to see the songs put on those tapes. But I hadn't seen the full movie until probably around when Return to Neverland came out, around 2001, 2002. And I just watched it again recently when Disney Plus came out. I rewatched all the Disney animated movies again. This movie really does hold up for me. I think a lot of it really does hold up. I like the voice cast very, very much. I thought the music was very good. I like the comedy in this movie. The comedy in this movie is absolutely hilarious. The animation is always great. It's classic Disney animation. And yeah, it's one of those movies that I'm glad to see does hold up well over time. Like I said, I didn't see it back when I was little, but now that I've seen it as a grown-up, it still very much holds up to this very day. And I'm glad to see that it's not one of those movies that it actually, like I said, it does hold up better as time goes on. I like a lot of the animation. I like the music. I like the comedy. I mean, there's not really much more I can say about it. It's a classic Disney movie, and you can see why. It's a great, fun adventure film, and still, honestly, the best Peter Pan movie we've ever gotten. I mean, the only one that I think comes close has been Steven Spielberg's Hook, but even that had its problems to it. But as always, we'll get to that when we get to Hook in '91. But that's my thoughts on Peter Pan. Let's go ahead and move on to the last movie, and that is Billy Crystal and Meg Ryan in the romantic comedy When Harry Met Sally. Directed by Rob Reiner, this came out 2 years after The Princess Bride came out in '87, and it really cemented Rob Reiner's success level as a filmmaker. He had been on a roll with these hit movies, This Is Spinal Tap, The Sure Thing, Stand By Me, the aforementioned Princess Bride, and now this movie, which I really think is a cinematic masterpiece. This is really one of the great romantic comedies of all time. It's interesting that Billy Crystal actually thought this movie would flop because of the fact that, like I said before, a lot of the movies coming out were going up against these huge blockbusters, Indiana Jones, Batman, Lethal Weapon 2, so on and so forth. So they decided to do the platform method, which is basically opening it in select cities, mostly in New York and LA, and then letting the word of mouth garner enough interest so they can expand it in coming weeks. And sure enough, a week after this movie came out, the movie actually did pretty well on its opening weekend, grossing about $9 million, and it was still in under 1,000 theaters, and eventually went on to gross more than $92 million, which is way more above its $16 million budget. And you can definitely see why the movie caught on. This movie really is a very good romantic comedy. You can buy into the chemistry between Billy Crystal and Meg Ryan. The dialogue works really well. This is Nora Ephron writing. Usually she usually can never really do bad. There have been times when she's done some movies that have not been as good, but most of the time she's been pretty solid, and this is definitely one of her strongest works. Bruno Kirby and Carrie Fisher are also in this movie, playing the friends of Harry and Sally. And this relationship that they have in this movie is just, it feels realistic. It feels genuine. Like, you don't ever feel like this is being forced onto you, like you have to like these people. But no, you like these people because they are generally likable people. And of course, you have like great moments like the restaurant scene, which if you go to that restaurant in Manhattan, they still have a sign that says, "Hope you had what she had. Enjoy." And it's literally hanging above the sign where that table was, the table where that scene was shot at. So, again, not really much more I can say about this one. I think a lot of people have already seen this movie, and I think a lot of people can agree it's one of the best romantic comedies ever made. So, not much more to say. When Harry Met Sally, it's a true classic. If you haven't seen it already, I'd say definitely check it out. And with that said, that's going to wrap up another edition of Time About the Movies. Next time around, we take a look at Weird Al Yankovic's feature film leading debut, which is UHF the Movie. And then we also have Shag the Movie, which features Bridget Fonda, Phoebe Cates, and Annabeth Gish in a comedy set in the 1960s. So we'll take a look at both of those movies next time around. So thank you for watching. And as always, if you want to see more episodes like this, check out the playlist on the next page, check out the previous episode. And I'll see you guys tomorrow for the next video. So until then, take care.